In this episode,
And once you've had your bit of Tinder fun, chit chat.
I mean, really, this should not be a homeowner's issue.
It will cost more to heat to 23. They work like magic at 20.
Feels like some of the data has been almost hidden by some manufacturers.
Right, there you go, Mrs. Biggins. I'm off now. See you later.
It's not going on my patio, and I'm going, it would fit there really nice.
hi and welcome back to Homeowners Q&A. I'm your host Mars, and in today's episode we're asking a simple but critical question. How do you properly plan a heat pump installation? We know that success starts long before the system goes in, and today we're walking through the entire journey step by step with 4 industry experts who have helped hundreds of homeowners do just that. Joining me are Rhiannon from Warmer, Emma Bohan from IMS Heat Pumps, Louise Howlett from RA Brown, and Simon Baseden from AAC Group. Welcome everybody. Before we get started, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Rhiannon for sponsoring this episode. We truly appreciate Rhiannon's continued commitment to helping homeowners better understand, manage and optimize their heating systems. Their dedication to delivering reliable, high-performance renewable heating solutions is playing a vital role in supporting the UK's transition to low-carbon living. Thank you once again to Rhiannon for empowering homeowners with the tools, knowledge and confidence to get the very best out of their heating systems. So we've done quite a lot of these episodes. I think we've actually just breached 50. And the one thing is that we have spoken to a lot of experts now on this show. And it's really interesting that when we discuss heat pumps and heat pump installations, everybody obviously has a slightly different take on that process. So Emma, in your opinion, what should the starting point be for anybody that's considering installing a heat pump?
Stand and have a look at your own house. Literally look at your own house and look at things that you might not have thought about, and do that now, even if you've got a brand new boiler. But do it now if you've got a boiler that's coming to the end of its life and you're half even thinking about it. So are you as insulated as you can afford to be? How long have those radiators been on the wall? I say this quite a lot to a lot of people, but nobody notices radiators until you notice radiators. And you generally only look at them when you're either repainting and they're annoying to get behind, or when they fall off a wall and stop working. I always call them like the student house radiators that have been like painted over 15 times. They've been on the wall since the first central heating system was installed. I mean, the house I'm living in now, that was exactly what it was like when we bought it. Are there things that you can do now to your home over a period of time that's just going to make it that little bit warmer, that more insulated? Fabric first is probably a really good starting point. A more insulated property is going to need a smaller heat pump. It's going to cost you less to run. It's going to cost you less to buy it in the first place, because a 3.5 kilowatt versus a 7 kilowatt is 2 different prices, and one's more than the other. And then radiators, if you've already spent some time, a radiator a quarter, a radiator a month, where you upsize that radiator and get that done, you've got less disruption going forward.
So Rhiannon, when Emma says, try and upgrade your radiators, okay, so you've got a radiator in a room that might be small for a heat pump, but you don't know how big that might necessarily be if you do want a heat pump. Or can somebody if they are thinking about the heat pump, they want to upgrade that rad now, is there a metric for them to try and just get their head around to go, okay, this is a K2, do I just simply go with a K3 here?
It's a really good question. And funnily enough, it's the sort of thing that normally, that is one way of doing it, of looking at what you've got and what you can upgrade now. And if you've got a single panel radiator, you're almost certainly going to be needed to upgrade those. And it's hard for somebody who isn't in the industry, who's not designing systems, to look at it and to know. You could just put in a radiator that's as big as you can find and, use up all the space, that kind of thing. But you can also get someone around to measure it, so you're working with known. But then you're kind of going further down the line of that thing. So for me, I always think there's 2 trains of thoughts for here. Do little bits to get ready on the way. That is totally valid, and Emma's completely right. Timing is everything. So if you are redecorating a room, yes, look at changing the radiator for that room. And maybe sort of seek out a bit of advice from, most heating engineers should be looking at sort of what kilowatts you're coming out of different radiators and should be able to advise you on that thing. The other train of thought is, if you research it or do it all at the same time, you can then get like VAT and things like that off radiators if you're doing it all as a big install. So I always think sort of timing is everything, and everyone's situation is really, really different. So that's always quite a tricky one, and then every radiator is designed as part of a bigger system, and someone's thought about the whole thing rather than one little bit at a time.
Simon, is there such a thing as going too big on a radiator? So, if, for example, I just walk into my plumbing merchant, I'm thinking about putting in a heat pump. They've got a massive sale on their radiators. They're all too big for my house, way too big. Can you go like way too big on radiators when it comes to heat pumps?
Yes, in my opinion, you can definitely go too big. From a design point of view, we want to balance the heat input to the heat loss. That's the point of the room by room calculations. And if, for example, you oversize the radiators by 50% to each room, we would have to then dynamically control it from load compensation and weather compensation and try and balance that back. To give you a perfect example, let's say you had 16 kilowatts of emitters and you put in a 10 kilowatt air source heat pump. The heat pump won't produce more than the output of the heat pump at any dedicated curve. The radiators will reach their limit. But if you say in your living room, you put 3 kilowatts too many compared to other rooms, then you'll get unbalancing. It'll be more difficult to balance the rooms. The ideal solution, as much as it's good at certain redecoration points to put in more radiators and bigger radiators and so on, we all know they sometimes need to be bigger. I believe, and I'm a bit of a purist, so this is where you'll have to forgive me on these panels, I believe in the structure of the design and the advice first. If we ideally knew somebody, my advice would be find out somebody from a forum like yours or a friend or someone that you know's had one. See if you can get someone to help you use some online calculators to get a really good idea of the size. And the risk is it won't be perfect. There's different versions of people's views of a heat loss of a room. We can't get fabric super accurate, but it's fairly. We're all arguing about air infiltration and exfiltration. We all know that's slightly over the top, if sometimes a lot over the top. My advice would be don't go and get the biggest radiators you can and don't triple them up for the sake of tripling them up. Try to find a way, and I don't know what the answer to this is, try to find a way to understand the heat loss in your building and your rooms better, and then get a more informed choice. That would be the better answer, I think.
If you're going to do it sort of one at a time or that kind of thing, but if you are going sort of jumping in with both feet, then that'll all be done as part of the design, won't it?
Louise, where do you stand on kind of the starting point? Do you agree with Emma?
I'm increasingly seeing or feeling that the starting point for homeowners is what they want to achieve. So assuming something has pointed them in the direction of looking at a heat pump system, or something's pointing them at looking for a new heating system, it could be they're doing a extension or a renovation or a refurb or something where they're thinking changing heating is going to be part of this. Then as far as you can, being a non-technical person, it is, as Emma was saying, looking at what you've got, looking at where you're at, what do you want to achieve? And it's beginning to get a little feel for this, really technical subject that the guys are talking about in terms of the design of the system, and just finding a way to learn enough as a layperson about whether you want to go for the lowest flow temperatures in your system, which will mean the biggest up radiators effectively, and therefore that's going to cost you more to do an upgrade if it's a retrofit, if you're upgrading, or if you want to go the other way and accept that with you're going to be not as energy efficient, but you could still have a good heat pump system, but you might accept that running at higher flow temperatures is not going to save you as much money on your bills, but then you won't necessarily have so much radiator upgrade to pay for. So it's beginning to get a feel with all the information that is out there for where you stand on that sort of stuff, so that when you start getting the heat loss surveys and it's like decisions to be made at that point, and being able to have an educated conversation with that installer on those things, not whilst becoming a heating geek, as it were, but just having the bare bones so that you can have that conversation. That's where I feel the starting point is.
So, Rhiannon, you've taken a look at your property, you've looked at it, the installation, you've looked at your rads, you go, okay, this can work for me. What is the next step? What should the homeowners be then pursuing?
So I think you've got two options then. You either start to call people, or you need to make sure, like, you might be eligible for a grant. So they're the two ways that I would go. And I don't know if it really matters which one you do first. So there are a few different grants available. The one that we normally talk about for the able to pay market is the bus grant. I think most people who have watched any part of your podcasts,
Mhm.
Miles will have heard about the bus grant. But there are other grants that are available. There's different eligibility criteria with those. But if you've got a house, a property that's got a particularly bad energy performance certificate rating, D and below, if you are on a limited income, if you have certain health issues, you could stand to get like quite a lot of government funding, whether it's the Eco4, the Warm Homes, local grant. I think there is quite a lot of help out there, and I know a lot of this is always aimed at being able to pay. We all know that £7,500, and you have to take out either your oil or your gas boiler, or if you've got like an old electric one, you can all that kind of stuff. The other grants might make it possible for you to have insulation upgrades and solar and smart controls and other things like that. So we think phoning someone maybe should come after that, because it would depend on who you go for, because different installers can adopt those different grants. Not everybody can do Eco4.
Yeah, if we could all move to Scotland, where they're able to pay funding is £7,500 as a grant, and then up to £7,500 as a 0% interest-free loan over like 10 plus years, and then they have a similar scheme attached to all the rest of the energy efficiency upgrades, such as double glazing and controls and solar PV if you're going to have a heat pump as well. So yeah, it's quite a good funding regime up there.
So Simon, once you've figured out kind of which avenue's the correct one for you, whether it's bus or Eco4, you pick up the phone, I'm assuming, you get a couple of installers to come through. What should the expectations be on the part of the homeowner from those visits from the installer?
So initially, I think most companies would then arrange an agreed, mutually agreeable date and time. Most companies and most surveys, I think, take around 2 to 4 hours if you get to that stage. So I think a lot of companies may use estimating software like we do to give you a really good idea, where you want the client to understand the cost. There are still many people that think it might be £1,000 or two. And then, so once we get over that initial stage, moving forward from there, let's say, for example, we don't do the surveys for free, but a couple of others do. What they may like to do is use the option of people that are offering them for free. Then there's no cost to them and they can get an initial view. I do recommend going with a paid option if you feel the communication was right, because there's a lot more to the service than being cheapest and offering stuff for free. This kind of industry can be better served with a little bit of care, a little bit of thought, and a little bit of time taken to understand their building, their circumstance and so on. So we have a policy here that if somebody requires a bit more attention from us, whether it's with needs or age or access, and so it doesn't have to be old or young or male or female, it can be anyone that needs a bit more. We try to offer that little bit more help. And I'll give you an example of something we would do during the survey or towards the initial installation at the beginning. Many companies will have stuff delivered on the day it starts. We don't. We do everything here, and we ask people to sign the waiver, but they're welcome to come see the kit if they want to see the colours and the stuff. We will unpack it. We'll do whatever they want. I've heard several complaints about the equipment turns up before with the 2 weeks rule. The client who's in their 70s trying to carry a 140 kilo condenser to their garage because they'll drop it at the curb. They will not push it up your drive. We try to cover things like that. So what the client could expect is, let's say, a variety of options where someone may or may not do an initial visit and survey for free. They come along and they should expect 2 to 4 hours of every area of your home: loft, gutters, ceiling, walls, outside, doors, access, drive, pathways, neighbours, over the fence. We even go that far. What is it? How can we get in there? How are we going to fit this? And then a very pleasant conversation. What do you want? Why are you doing this? How do you expect this system to operate for you? Do you want to be 23 degrees warm? It's your right. We've got this paranoid 2021. It's your heating system. It will cost more to heat to 23. They work like magic at 20. Here's your parameters. This is what you want. And let's make it into better language. Let's say, here's my software. I'll sit with you. We've done an initial assessment of your home. If we run your system at 40-degree design and you want 21, you'll pay roughly £1,200 a year. Everyone's going to shout at me for that. If we run it at 45 and we can achieve 23 degrees C in your home at peak, it's £300 more a year to run it. What would you like me to design to? How warm is your home normally? And they say, well, I like it at 20. My wife likes it at 24. I say, shall we go for 22 then? Well, it's still the same machine. It's still the same radiators. It's just and I said, do you know what the magic is? When we've commissioned it for you, turn it on to a low curve so we only reach 20. And every day that you go, I'm a bit cold, let's move the curve one. And then you'll find where you want to be. So I think my answer is 2 to 4 hours, a very pleasant conversation and an in-depth review of stuff and lots of questions. And my advice would be to the homeowner, learn your home, understand your home, and don't be afraid to have a choice. We know the limits of where we can put these machines. Yeah. If you want it next to your back door, and we genuinely can't put it there because of some rules with 290 or some other safety rules, or now we can put them against in the alleyways, but I see that there's a side bedroom window to the neighbour. I'm going to say to you, look, we can't put it here, but what about 2.5 meters further down? Because I've done my software and you know what? That just about ticks the box. That's your choice. My wife certainly says, if we're having one, it's not going on my patio. And I'm going, it would fit there really nice.
I would just say, just reiterate what Simon said. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's really important. And if you're going to have a relationship with your installer, they need to not get exasperated. They need to be able to answer you and explain their answers as well. So you really want someone to find someone who's going to have a bit of that time, a bit of that patience. And, at the end of the day, we love talking about this kind of stuff. This is, our bread and butter. This is why I got into the industry, because I absolutely love talking about it. And everybody's situation is different. And I think it's important that people know that they're not expected to know all the answers. Like, they don't have to research it and come going, I know what I want, I know why. That is not a truth. And I think, don't be afraid to ask questions. There is no silly, stupid question. And I would just encourage people to find someone who answers their questions without making them feel stupid or, anything like that.
Are you thinking about getting a heat pump? Then don't get caught out by a bad installation. Bodge Buster is your essential guide to asking the right questions and spotting red flags before it's too late. Written from real homeowner experience, this book gives you the knowledge to avoid costly mistakes and make informed decisions. Get Bodge Buster today in print or for Kindle, link in the description.
Your initial calls with the installer, you should be using those as like your online dating Tinder chat before you actually meet in person, So as much as you have the questions for the installer, it's the installer asking you questions. Because if your first initial conversation or two with that installer is just all about booking a survey, then, I'm going to have some red flags. Whereas if your first call with that is like, let me get you somebody technical to speak to, and all of the things that Louise and Rhiannon and Sam have just said, what is it that you're wanting to do? Why do you want a heat pump in the first place? How old is your gas boiler? What's making you think about it? Do you think you've got enough outside? You should be getting these questions from somebody. And then, once you've had your bit of Tinder fun, chit chat, you've swiped right on 3 or 4, but you're only going to go out for dinner with 1, maybe 2, aren't you? It's exactly the same thing. But, when you turn up at that dinner, you should expect exactly what Simon says. Somebody who knows what they're talking about is going around trying to verify some of the stuff that you've already told them. Are you 6 foot tall and blonde? Is your house brick with a cavity wall? Does it have 4 bedrooms and an outside toilet? It's all of that same kind of stuff. And then, if you've got any other questions, or the installer saying, well, I see that you have got the space there on the patio, but Mrs. Simon says we can't put it there. Well, have we thought about X, Y, Z? Or, yes, this R290 that you were looking at, but there is an R32 from another manufacturer that we could potentially look at, which could go there. So, there's all of those things that can, again, installers with prescriptive ideas of, we only do one manufacturer, one kind of unit, one kind of sizing, or, we'll do it in a 5 or 7 or my heat loss is, 6 point something, which one do I have, the 5 or 7, or we could use this manufacturer. There's lots of different things, but those initial conversations, you should really utilize that time to get to know the people before you invite them into your home. I guess it's like anybody, you just don't just invite randoms in, do you? Or try not to.
We've traditionally had a 3-step process. So the step would be like the proposal or the specification, which does have pricing in, but traditionally has also had some product options and some starting to throw the bit about the design, where it's like asking questions about radiator upgrades or flow temperatures and all of that. Just starting to introduce the customer to that. So quite detailed. What I think is really important is that proper specification that's been produced after the heat loss, where you've got the actual heat load, that's a starting point of those light technical discussions, not going into huge technical detail, but just empowering the customer to then really say, this is what I want, or, and stuff about radiators potentially, and stuff about products and positions, which you will have talked about during the survey, but it's like putting it all on paper so that you can then really go through it bit by bit and then make tweaks. And then obviously the final step is then the contract, which again, customer needs to understand everything. And obviously at that point, loads of MCS loads of stuff that we have to put in there gets thrown in there, which can make it a huge and confusing document. We've got all the information at that point. You work into the proper kind of heat loadings. You can begin to really, the guys can talk through it step by step, which is what they do.
Yeah, I mean, Louise has just hit it on the head in terms of your original point about, what should the customer expect when they're getting the quote. Because we are, unfortunately, foisted about 18 pages of gum by rec, HICE, or MCS. Just daft things like, I'm with the HICE consumer code. And, we have to have a 2-page cancellation form at the end of the contract before they've even signed a job. And it's mandatory that it's included, along with a, notification of information that needs to be attached to the quote that is a standalone 8-page PDF. There's this side of the 43 pages you get sent by the installer that we've got no control over whatsoever. But what you should get or be able to easily access is, the details of what it is, when you've had your conversations about flow versus upgrades and, which unit is going where is, and, what size cylinder, you should have a list of what you're going to buy, so if it's a Valent 7 kilowatt, it should say it's a Valent 7 kilowatt. If it's a Valent 250, it should say it's a Valent 250. If it's pre-plumbed, it should say it's pre-plumbed, or if it's, an EB 8 kilowatt with a 300-litre joule, then it should tell you what it is. It should tell you, if you've got a buffer. There should be definitely a mention of an installation pack, or, that it should be, clear that that's within that. There should be labour on there, and it should detail that, it's also going to be, passing MCS, and whether you're going to go for the bus scheme, or HES loan, or whatever that might mean. And then, your bog standard terms and conditions as per any contract, and again, some of those terms and conditions we have to adopt because of MCS processes. So there's, only limited scope to move things around in there. And then, there'll be where the payment terms, which is, some installers take a deposit, some don't. The point of the bus scheme is to knock the money off, but some installers don't. They're still allowed to charge you and then give it you back once they claim it. So yeah, it's just like any contract. What am I buying? How much is it costing me? When am I paying for it? And what are my cancellation rights?
This next point, Rhiannon, actually, it makes my head hurt so much because the homeowner now has got their heat loss from a credible installer, and they can all agree, for example, let's throw a random number, 7 kilowatts. They will then get matched up with potentially a 7 kilowatt heat pump, which is not really a 7 kilowatt heat pump at all at peak. That heat pump will operate at that temperature when it's 7 degrees outside, so your home is really nice and warm. That temperature drops to 2 degrees, 0, -1. That heat pump is not capable of heating that house. What do homeowners do about trying to verify whether the unit that they've been given will be capable of producing the heat when they need it most?
I mean, really, this should not be a homeowner's issue. This is an installer issue. The installer should know which products you can go with the number that's attached to it in the title of the product, and which ones, that only accounts for the output at 7 degrees, not -2 or -5. I know there are sort of some culprits that people have been caught out a little bit. Personally, this is something I just don't think homeowners should have to carry the load of. This is an installer. If you've chosen a good installer, they will choose the right product for your home. So I share your frustration. I don't know what the answer is because I've got no power to change it. But really, that should not be a homeowner issue.
I'd go one step further than Rhiannon just said. I don't think it's just not a homeowner. I mean, homeowners can be affected by it, but it's a manufacturer issue. It feels like some of the data has been almost hidden by some manufacturers. If an installer is suggesting what seems like a vastly oversized kilowattage, it could be because of that hidden technical data. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who they're dealing with, they do have to trust that the installer is looking at the right line of the data of what the performance at, say, -2, -3, whatever we have to design at, and which is geographically different across the country, and the homeowners shouldn't have to get into that. If you've got an 8 kilowatt heat load and then there's installers saying you need a 16 kilowatt heat pump, which can happen, which seems ridiculous, it's due to this really dramatic drop-offs that are actually there with some of the manufacturers.
I agree with both of you. And I mean, we're just another classic example of that. We actually bought our heat pump from a manufacturer who basically installed it for us, and they sized it, and it's an 18 kilowatt, which is not capable of running at more than 12 point something at -2, and they sold it to us. So, I agree with you, Rhiannon, in terms of saying that, this shouldn't be a homeowner issue, but we bought it directly from the manufacturer. It's the industry that's at fault. So, Simon, is there anything, or would you advise that homeowners just go through that information just to double check and call up the installer saying, as Louise said, I've got an 8 kilowatt heat loss. You've proposed a 16 kilowatt heat pump, which seems like crazy big. Is it worth just having that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes back to my answer earlier. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. We're talking about trust here. There seems to be a disconnect of trust because obviously we're hearing lots of horror stories which seem to hold the press. And we don't ever hear about my customers aren't phoning. They're phoning me, but they're not phoning you going, oh, we had the best install ever, because it's not news. What's news is this drama. Ask the questions. If you picked a contractor to go with, feel that you can trust them once you feel that you can trust them. And then if you felt that and they've done a good service and they did a good survey and you've done a bit of background research on, so they exist and they've got lots of praise and you can phone a customer, maybe, hopefully, there's no reason not to trust them. The quicker this gets fixed, and it's been covered many times before, we can get some commonality. Some of us are very good at converting the differences. So, for example, I might look at your building, you've got an 8.6 kilowatt loss. I might put an 11 eco down in because that's the next stage, which may or might, it's not oversized. We regulate them and design them to run at what we want them to. So I might even program an 11 kilowatt. Don't bother doing 11 kilowatts, do 10. I might reduce the flow rate and just tell it to it. And this is where it will cascade down to 10 kilowatts all the time. So it's not over. We're just creeping up that bottom end of how low it can go in them springs and them arms. This is why this is such an important aspect of not over design it too far.
I do think as the industry starts to grow, and like Simon said, the press is just loves a negative story, but there will hopefully be less negative, more positive, and then people will trust in it, and then all these things will become less of an issue.
Are you new to heat pumps and feeling lost? Then From Zero to Heat Pump Hero helps you understand, operate, and optimize your system. No jargon, just simple practical advice from one homeowner to another. Take control of your heating and save energy. Get your copy now. Link in the description. So Emma, let's fast forward a little bit now. So you've selected your installer, they've come to your house, they've put the heat pump in, the unit's gone in, the cylinder's gone in. Probably the most important points of this whole process is the commissioning, or what should that commissioning process look like from a homeowner's perspective?
So it should look like there is somebody who knows what they're doing, and it's not like a drive-by commissioning where somebody kind of turns it on, bit, right, there you go, Mrs. Biggins, I'm off now, see you later. It's a mini driving lesson. So you're expecting somebody, so they're going to turn it on. So you're not going to be involved. You can be around, but you're not going to be, we're going to turn it on. We're going to make sure that everything's filled. We're going to make sure that everything's working. We're going to make sure there's no air in the system. We're going to make sure that the radiators are getting hot and that the water is running. We're going to make sure that their cylinder kicks in when the 3-port diverter valve moves. We're going to do these tests to make sure that system is actually a working system. And then once we've satisfied ourselves with that, we're going to start doing the commissioning, which is the settings. It's the little box on the wall or on the side of the unit, which then, comes into, how do you want your tea binged? So, the more expensive models have got, an Apple iPad style commissioning center and, the B&M microwave, they still heat your system, but they're more like a Casio calculator. So, we've got more availability of data, more availability of settings in some units than others. But so we're talking about, flow temperatures, making sure that they're working, looking at the information that's coming back from the system, setting any setbacks that you might want in discussion with the homeowner. Do you want anything doing with it? Or are you going to, have you got various ways that you want the heating to work? Do you want domestic hot water priority, or would you prefer to run that in line with maybe a time of use tariff? You're looking at your weather compensation, making sure that that's all set up correctly. So you're going through all of this, and then you're going to try and enlighten the homeowner about at least some of the basic settings. Now, you know, the homeowners there, they're like looking at all this beautiful pipe work and their amazing new heat pump and trying to work out whether it's working because it's so quiet outside and they can't hear it. And so they're not necessarily always able to take it in first time. So you're going to do all of that and you're probably going to come back then at 8 point in the future. And it's very important, especially if you turn it on in the summer, that's great. You're going to check that it does come on. You're going to force it to come on. You're going to force it to do all of the things that it needs to do. But, you know, if you just installed it in July and it's 30 degrees outside, you're not really putting it through its paces. So we're generally going to go back when the weather kicks in, make sure that the homeowner is happy. You know, and again, you know, to echo something like this, it's your house. If you're wandering around and, you know, a room doesn't feel as warm as you'd like it to be, speak to your installer. If there's a room that's too hot, speak to your installer. It's teething troubles. You know, you need to settle in. You know, oh, I thought I wanted it 23, but bloody hell, I'm really hot now. Can we turn it down a bit? You know, or I thought I wanted to run it at 25. I've just seen it bill, and I'd actually rather like to run it, you know, whatever it is. It should be full. It should not just be half an hour of, there you go, love, there's some manuals and I'm off now. You know, have you got any questions then? You know, we do a lot where we film them and send that to the homeowner for later, or they will film us while we're doing it. There are, though, some amazing things that, you know, depending on which heat pump you've got, that can either be installed or available to you after, which continues that process long after the boots have left the ground. Things like Haven Wise, things like Homely, where they will step in and like continue to optimize that system. We'll work with you on time of use tariffs and, you know, all those kind of things. So it feels a bit like you've constantly got an engineer in your plant room anyway.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, that commissioning and having that time to ask questions when people's eyes are glazing over and realizing that different information lands at different times, but the fact that it all will work and, you know, acknowledging there might be little things that need tweaking after you've lived with the system for a while, but generally speaking, you don't have to do anything. When you get it right, take it off your to-do list. You just, it's done.
My biggest advice is if you are watching that commissioning process and before you glaze over, just make sure that that installer actually activates weather compensation on your system. Because all too often we're beginning to see the biggest issue with the commissioning portion of this process is that they just leave it on a set flow temperature. Ours was left on 45 degrees for 3 years or 2 years before we actually knew what weather compensation was. And I actually had a guest on one of the podcasts that we filmed this morning saying it should just be banned. Manufacturers should just not have that feature. It should just be weather comp exclusively. Would you agree with that, Simon?
Yes, and or something near. So I've started noticing that now default new sets of controllers for big manufacturers are coming out preset already. Even if they're not a perfect preset, they're like an 80%. So no one's getting torched before they realise. I think you were talking about it the other week as well on a different podcast, or maybe somewhere on a forum, that big manufacturers like Vaillant and Mitsubishi now, they're coming out with their new sets of controls where they automatically go on a 0.6, 0.7 curve. Or whichever version of it, because different manufacturers call them slightly different things. I think there's one that does 1 to 9, and I think there's already. In fact, every time you look at one, you go, "How does this one work?" Because it's like a science on its own. Just put it in the middle. It means it won't be the most expensive, and it means it won't be the cheapest. But at least everyone that's plugging them in and running, you're still not then burning the customer for a year or two with £1,000 or £500, or without sounding too overexcited about it. It's hundreds of pounds of wasted energy. And the idea of doing all this for the government and for us and for this whole industry is to save carbon, save energy, stop wasting energy. Just find a way to heat your home that uses less energy. I don't think most installers are inherently bad people, but they're chasing a pound. They're trying to get a job done, and they've already booked another one maybe, and they're rushing it. 6 hours is the golden rule for me. It takes 6 hours to commission any air source heat pump we do in a 2-bedroom house or a 10-bedroom house. It takes longer than 6 and a 10. The other thing I am an advocate of, and we build into our price, seasonal commissioning. Exactly what Emma was touching on, seasonal commissioning. If you're installing the system in late spring, all of summer, early autumn, come on, guys, half a day. Please go back and tweak it again for free. Even if it's when you're in the area, it will be more efficient if you set it up in November, December, January, February, or March-ish.
We build in what we call a 6-week follow-up into our price. But that 6-week follow-up is that seasonal, push into that seasonal thing, because if the install is over, that, you know, from now onwards until end of August, September time, then actually the tweaking happens when it's the heating season. And it's all that. And I think all of that stuff and that support, on-site support, I mean, a lot of this stuff has also been said it can be done via apps or interactive things, which are either from the manufacturer or other external things where you can see how the heat pump's performing and tweak things. But in terms of actually on site and balancing things and tweaking things, that's why something we haven't mentioned is geographical area. You know, we work within a tight geographical area, and I would be very wary of getting an installer that's more than, you know, an hour and a quarter's drive away, because you do need to be able to get them to physically come and tweak things. And you need to think of that as a customer as well as the installer thinking about what patch they cover. I'm actually passionate about that geographical kind of patch. So I think both sides need to be aware of that, because that costing of physically going and doing the tweaking is so important as well.
If you've got any questions about heat pumps, then you need to join the Renewable Heating Hub forums. You can connect with other homeowners, share experiences, and get advice on heat pumps and renewables. Sign up today and be a part of the conversation. Link in the description. So that's it for today's episode of Homeowners Q&A. A huge thank you to Rhiannon, Emma, Louise, and Simon for sharing their insights and expertise. And a huge thank you to Neebie for sponsoring this conversation and for their continued support in helping homeowners make informed choices about their heating systems. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.